Well, welcome to the Church Office podcast.
My name's Gavin Smith, and if you're joining us on video, then here's a little wave.
We're excited to have Nigel Ring join us.
I've never actually heard the word wicked and accountant put in the same sentence.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Church Office podcast. My name's Gavin Smith. It's a joy to welcome you today. The Church Administration podcast. We love talking about all the work that happens behind the scenes. And 2023, we've had Nigel Ring on, we've had Mark Parsons, and mate, we've pulled you together, Tim. Absolute legend.
Well, first of all, it's very good to be here. It's slightly daunting that you've just reeled off some massive names, and then you've got this northerner accountant from Leeds who pops along every so often to talk about church finance. So
yeah.
It's great to be in this. Anything I can be of service, I always love.
Absolutely love having Tim on, and as you know, he is just brilliant on the podcast and loads of wisdom. And for us who are serving in our churches, you know, whether it's in finance or right across the board spectrum of church administration, then hopefully today's topic of budgeting is going to help you. And I think we really felt that. I was sat, you know, re-listening again to the kind of conversation we had with Nigel Ring, and just posted out a video in the last few weeks. And he's just got so much wisdom, isn't he, to capture, and
you can see it just dripping. The wisdom just comes out of the conversation. I was fascinated. I've been working with churches, charities, and organisations for many years, and have looked at many budgets, been part of trustees meetings and whatnot. Not for as many years as Nigel has, but it was just to be able to just hear the experience and the wisdom, and how he just brought together the real importance of where a church needs to be going, how this budget process really fits into vision, and keeping the main thing.
Yeah.
When it's so easy to get sucked into the detail, the challenges, obviously the lack of resources, which the natural barriers, and just being able to write this is the focus. And it was really interesting to hear.
He was great, wasn't he? I loved his heart when he was just, you know, kind of just again prompting us, saying, you know, the church doesn't need to be in survival mode at the minute. It needs to be available. It needs to be out there sharing the good news of Jesus with people. And as we think about that in budgeting, you know, I loved his comments on saying, you know, what is at the essence of what you do? You know, come to terms with what has God called you to do in this local church? What's the essence? And then what are the periphery things? What are the things that actually maybe you just need to find a different way of financing them? Maybe the finances need to be drawn back in a particular ministry, but maybe God's going to provide a person. And it's just lovely, just picture of going, oh, this guy gets it.
Yeah.
And it's so helpful to be challenged in that way as we talk about finances and ministry and faith and all these things that are going around our head as we talk about churches' budgets this year.
Yeah, and it's a real challenge what he brought about. And from you know, when I was listening to it and just trying to apply that into the church clients we work with, knowing the differing scenarios we get as a bit of a barometer of how churches across UK and areas are doing, it's a real challenge, isn't it? Because I think what he's given a challenge of a very important perspective, and the big question that's kind of an answer is how does that shaping of a budget work with a group of people? Because you had a great conversation about, you know, leaders, church elders, how your church is structured, how trustees are involved, how the finance manager or administrator is involved there, and how that is shaped. Is quite it's that's the next big question, isn't it? Really, of like this, you know, if we're able to embrace that challenge of keeping the main thing, keeping the focus that the church is not meant to be in survival mode at the moment, with the limits of the constraints on budgets, and how do we shape that? And that, for me, I think that's the big question of how that does that, which would be interesting to explore.
It's great, and I love this point. You know, trustees, we want them to be spiritual. I think just starting talking about budgeting, we're talking about teams and people talking about this stuff. You know, this shouldn't be a single person doing it on their own, feeling like they're carrying a responsibility. You know, this needs to be on leadership team agendas. This needs to be talked about. There needs to be thought and planning and prayer going into all of this. And so if you are on your own, then, you know, first bit of advice, how can you expand that and bring people into that conversation? And, you know, our elders, our PCCs, these guys have got a responsibility to work the finances through, to connect it to vision. And so don't do it on your own. That is absolutely key.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I do something, because I do have occasion done specific training around budgets, and one of the things I find that clients are asking me more and more to do is support with budgets and forecasts. Now, budgets versus forecasts are slightly different things, but the essence is coming from the same place. And what the bit I find fascinating about this budget setting process, if I was to launch into a little bit of, I guess, financial theory, if you like, is just how that last part of the budget setting works. So what I often talk about is a pyramid of how you build your budget, with the base layer being the foundation stage of you start with the budget of what you actually know. It's usually that individual, the finance officer, the administrator, starting off with what factually know, what happened last year. We will start the budget there. Nice, straightforward. We then get onto the essentials, which is the next building block of what do we need to change this for? What's happened with our donors? Have people dropped off? Have we been growing? Have the government changed the national insurance tax again? And the things that we know are coming on the horizon, we need to change. Now, those two steps are normally the nice, straightforward, easy bits, even though that they can at times be nervy if you're a church or organization where your resources are limited, and it is starting to paint a clear picture as to how things may look like in your next financial year, or even the next financial year after that, if you're that you're an organization that are doing 2 years ahead. But the final stage, which I sometimes call the principal stage of how you shape this last part of the budget, is the bit that I find really fascinating. Is really, I think, the bit of how we help shape this budget in the direction we want it to, and on the values and the vision that the church is wanting to have. And it's the bit where I think everything can either fall down and get complex, or we can gather round in faith, knowing that actually, wow, God, you've really blessed us here. We've got a fantastic budget with plenty of resources, or things are looking tricky, Lord, we need is providing. So that final stage for me of the pyramid is the key bit. And I often talk about some principles around budgeting that can be helpful to help people on this journey of wherever you're at in your organization's kind of financial journey in setting a budget, is understanding some of those principles, of which often the most common one that people automatically go to, because I think people have this whenever we say the word budget, some of us will have a twitch in the eyebrow, because we've been used to those family budget discussions, which can be a bit tricky, and it often comes with a connotation of restriction and holding things back and being prudent, of which prudence is a key principle of important part of budgeting. We're being a little bit reserved, a little bit worst case scenario, but it's not the only one. And it's kind of, I quite like busting this kind of, a budget doesn't always have to carry this assumption that it has to always be prudent. We've always got to carry this kind of like step. So you can have an aspirational budget, for example. We if everybody knows we're setting a budget that's aspirational and everyone's on that journey together, knowing that this is what we're aiming for, as opposed to something that's we're sitting back and thinking, we just want to be cautious. That's another principle you can do. And there's quite a lot of principles. But what my key thing is when I'm talking to people about budgeting is making sure everybody knows the kind of value you've put around how you've shaped your budget. If someone's got a prudent mindset and someone's got an aspirational mindset, that's where there's
going to be gaps, isn't there?
It's where the journey kind of comes apart. So and it's where that budgeting theory kind of meets those big faith and vision questions of how that budget gets shaped, which I find quite interesting.
It's interesting. Go back to your first base layer. I think is so important of kind of assessing previous data and having information there is so key, isn't it? Because like a family budget, if you take it so simplified to a family budget, 70% of it doesn't change. Most of it isn't. These are fixed things, or okay, they're rising costs maybe in in terms of the church, in terms of areas of utility and building, things like that. But the majority of it, we don't get to make huge amounts of decisions in those kind of areas that are fixed. It is as you go up that pyramid where decisions actually matter, and having the right facts and the right information to give to people who are decision makers, who are aspirational, maybe in wanting to push forward the mission, and explore new ways that the church can reach out that does cost money. I want to be able to make sure that they've got all the information to make those decisions, and by making that decision, here's what some of the consequences might be. But I'm going to stand with you in faith, because I really think you're onto something here. God's leading us in this direction. And there's a degree of trust and faith that has to come. And as we ask our donors and our members to give in faith, I want that mix and that thinking to be going on in our budget as well, as we progress through, into that pyramid that you're saying.
Absolutely, really important. And I think one of the things I love doing a bit in my job is being able to give boards, some trustee boards and key management, the facts in the most plainest financial storytelling way, so that it can equip them to go off and do, make those decisions and be informed. And I think it's a really helpful mindset as well, if you're listening out there and you carry the weight of responsibility for preparing that budget and communicating those financial stories, is that if you can, I've been many a time where I've realized that actually things are more looking south than I would like for this organization. And you do automatically feel a sense of responsibility for that, even though you're not responsible. And if you're able to carry a mindset of I'm communicating facts to help people be informed, to then, seek God, make decisions, communicate, and all the rest of it. It's a really good mindset. But you're right. If you don't have those base layer facts, it makes the process much harder. So.
And I think if you're in a leadership position and listening to the podcast, and you may not deal with the finances day to day, but you're involved in helping to set budgets and that, please check up on those that are serving in the area of finance. Let's make sure these guys are doing well and that they are being cared for. Because I've met so many treasurers who at this time are feeling the pressure, trying to balance budgets, trying to work things through. Trying to pull together the information, and so just as a quick snapshot, let's stand back and let's make sure that we care for those that are doing it, make sure that they've got what they need. What can we do to serve you that will enable you to do this more effectively, with more joy, with more anticipation of what's to come, so that people don't just get all bogged down in it. And I think that we want to care for people in this, don't we?
Absolutely, and it's really important. I know, particularly for certain church denominations as well, there are timetables for when compliance stat accounts have to be out at the same time as budgets and whatnot. It is an intense period, so looking after those people who are being good stewards of the finances is really important. Give them a pat on the back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't if you're like me, donut in hand, and I'm off.
It's so true. I mean, we kind of, it's funny. We go on retreat in January, and our year end is December, and we've got this kind of week period where we're like, how on earth do we pull together some kind of set of management accounts that we can look at, and we want there to be a time of just thanksgiving, a time of just amazement of all that God's done and provided resources for us this year, as well as then being able to move on to the next step and saying, right, this is a perfect time. We've got everyone in the room. How do we start talking about budgets for this year? So there's points, aren't there? There's seasons which are quite pressurized, and I think, if you're a church leader, being aware of those seasons and caring for people in the finance stuff is absolutely a must and is crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. Having some idea of what your financial rhythm that I sometimes talk about is what are the yearly, monthly pinch points that just super helpful to be aware of.
Jumping into income, Tim, the churches, I think churches are doing great, aren't they, in terms of standing orders, online giving. I mean, we're able to kind of, it's so much easier. I remember when I started, 19, 20 years ago, we were waiting for checks and cash to come in. You didn't know what you were going to get each month. Now we can actually do a bit of forecasting and can look ahead and say, if our donors and members continue to give in this way, this is what we can expect. And so kind of income, I always find when I'm doing my job, is so important to kind of monitor in
Mm.
terms of our budget and
Yep.
and setting our income. We can almost do that quite well, can't we? And I don't know what your advice is. We always do it quite conservatively in terms of, right, what are we going to get? Are we going to see a 5% increase, or are we going to see, do we just put in the same income as last year's budget, and then let's see what God does through that?
Yeah. It's really interesting.
What's your advice? Yeah.
Well, you're right. The information that we have with the modern accounting software that a lot of people use, whether it's Church Suite or other things, means that we've just got all this information, and forecasting and budgeting for income is much easier if you're a church that is predominantly, which most churches are, regular donation driven. It becomes a bit trickier for those churches who end up relying on those offering. Lots of churches call it different things, don't they? But they have the once a year offering or a special offering, or you end up being, your percentage of one-off donations is higher in your church, and that's sometimes much harder to predict and shape. And it's really interesting that you were sharing that your church is sometimes a little more prudent with income, and as it's budgeting of not quite knowing. I've got no other churches that use this as kind of an aspirational area of saying, this is the faith target we're really praying for, and so we're going for it. There's no right or wrong way there, but it's just trying to, if you can get a base of knowing roughly where you think things are going, and then you can then pull together and shape that however your church feels best. So it's got two classic examples there of you've got the raw data, and you've shaped it in a different way that's right for you guys based on what you're sensing God navigating you to how to manage it. Income is a good one. It's still some challenges, I think, with particularly for those churches that rely on one-off, those kind of giving annual giving points, or premises rentals and activities like that. The kind of feedback I'm getting from the kind of barometer is that some of those are still challenging in the cost of living crisis, and organizations not doing as many churches who are reliant on organizations to book their premises sometimes is still tricky. So it's tricky time for some organizations that I'm aware of.
And it does go back to some of those key principles, isn't it? Like, we've always tried to have a key principle that, all of our kind of outward bookings and stuff, we don't want to become reliant upon that there's a chasing after that, year on. But actually, how can we, we've always had a principle that, anything that we hire out in terms of conferencing, we will store up and use to improve the facility. And the funds that we have to improve the facility that year are based on the previous profits of what we gained in last year. So setting yourself some principles on that is great. But I know it's hard to apply a principle in the middle of something that you've been doing well. We've been doing this for 10 years, and there is a chasing after some income outside of giving. It's really key, like you're saying, all the different people who are involved, understanding aspirational, understanding the prudent, understanding how income comes in, and what's our principle on where are we prepared to go, what are we prepared to do, in terms of hire, in terms of all those things.
Absolutely, there's a phrase that I was told that I found really helpful, actually kind of leaning on what Nigel was saying, is that it's important, if you kind of use this, it's an analogy of a boxer. Basically, it's important to have the right hook of aspirational, faith-filled financial management and budgeting, but also with the very good left defensive block of good financial stewardship. And this is a topic that will be talked over and over and over again, because there's always this almost sweet tension of trying to find this medium, which inevitably brings us to our knees of saying, God, look, where are we going with this? And it's fantastic in some ways. If that tension wasn't there, the kind of faith-filledness of church finance disappears. So it's quite fascinating, really.
It is interesting. And I was speaking to a church the other day, and I think I guess I just want to drive the point here of just clarity is so important when we think about income. Is we had a church who were who barely had enough money to pay their staff
Yeah.
because they'd had this kind of long-standing kind of arrangement that all their gift aids that they collected from their giving went into a building fund that became a restricted fund. And so they had a huge level of money in a building fund that was restricted, but the day-to-day operations of running the church and paying staff were really limited. And you're saying, you know, why haven't you readdressed this? Oh, that's what we've always done. You know, we were at that point 10 years ago when we wanted to and we could afford to put all the gift aid in, and we did a once-a-year claim, and we dumped it in that account, and restricted funds are saying, well, actually, you might need to change that. You might need to bring a little bit of clarity, and it's okay to change it, and it's okay to have that conversation with trustees and PCCs and say, you know, maybe we need to, you know, address the way that we, you know, allocate these funds into restricted on, you know, into general funds. And so I'd encourage churches to think about those things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as a big part of what we do as independent examiners for churches is we always review the funds, and we would always highlight to an organisation if certain of whether their designated fund balance or restricted fund balance hasn't moved, because there are options. Even if you've got a restricted fund that's sat there for years, there are options available. Some of them are administratively tricky. Don't get me wrong. There's sometimes where you do have to ask permission from the Charity Commission to see whether you can unrestrict something or change the direction slightly of what the original giver gave, or you've got something that you've ring fenced. There are options available to be able to do that, and it do come across a number of times where people don't quite realize that if something has been restricted, there is a potential that it can be changed in a slightly different direction with the right process. So yes. Echo that encouragement.
Have a conversation about it, isn't it? You know, I think that's so cool. Let's go on to expenditure then. I mean, one of the big questions and challenges I think that people are facing is the idea of now setting a deficit budget. Churches who are looking ahead and they've done their budget, they've got their facts together, they've pulled it together, and they're looking and saying, we are going to be 25, 50,000 short, 100,000. Some churches face huge deficits. Tell me about deficit budgets and what your experience is on this.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. The organisation I'm the outsourced kind of finance officer for. It's one of the kind of niche roles we do in the firm. We only do it with a few organizations we choose to work with who are frontline organizations, because we want to essentially bless them as part of, you know, obviously it's part of our livelihood, but we want to equip them to do the work they're doing. And we at the moment are navigating through a tricky season of what the deficit budget looks like, which is larger than we would like, and it's tricky. So I think there's a few things I would share. The first off is there is often a kind of unspoken best practice that a budget has to be balanced, if that makes sense. And don't get me wrong, it's a good principle. It's always a good principle that you've got a balanced budget at the start of the year, that your incomes match expenditure, and that is a brilliant place. Now, the problem with that is if your organization is in a factual place that is highly unlikely, it is almost it's almost not good financial governance to set a very high target to say this is what we're gonna meet, if that makes sense. So you end up in this place of a deficit budget, and deficit budgets are tricky because they carry some weight about them. Now, there's a few caveats with that. The first of all is a deficit budget is not sustainable in the long term, but may well be sustainable in the short term. And that's a really important distinction. Is, are we setting a deficit budget here where we are quite in control? We've got our reserves, and we've got our reserves policy, which we're aware of and we've had for a number of years, and we know the reserves we need to have in the bank for us to continue as an organization for the long term in case something happens, or in case there's some other unexpected event that's going to take a hit into our reserves. If that is your situation, then navigating a deficit budget is much more plain sailing, because with some good financial storytelling, explanation of the road that you're walking on, of this is the immediate short-term outlook that we're looking at. These are the challenges, and these are the, you know, this one is the faith point of what we're praying for, what we're aiming for, and two, these are some of the practical steps which we're going to work towards of actually getting to a place where we are setting a balanced budget. So that's for me the first thing is this a short-term deficit budget? Have you got the reserves in the bank where it's not, you know, it's not causing you the organization a real issue, as in it's not going to be able to carry on going, and you can then work out a plan as to how things are then going to go. So that's the first thing I'd share, and I think that's probably for quite a few churches and organizations, that's their reality at this moment in time.
With that could be
with challenges of, I know lots of organizations have had to make really tricky decisions, and I know actually when we last spoke on the pod, I think it was May 22, and the financial crisis was not quite at its peak.
No, it wasn't.
And I remember we were talking about, the question you'd asked me is where would you advise investing? And one of the things I remember we're talking about was investing in staff. But I know now we're a number of months down the line, those difficult conversations are very real. Is that if we're going to be able to bless our staff, or not just bless our staff, just honor our staff by giving them, you know, essentially a real term increase in wage so that it's meeting the inflation, that has resulted in a deficit budget. And those decisions are hard because an increase in staff wages is a long-term commitment. It's not just we need to do this to the building, or our energy prices are much higher. They may come down, but obviously we don't know. But as staff wages, that's it then, if that makes sense. So that's a tricky there's some tricky things that churches are having to navigate at the moment. And if that's you, you know, hat off to you, keep persevering through those, because they can be tricky conversations to navigate. And then there's the second discussion, which is when a deficit budget is either very large or you have multiple years where it's looking like things are on the more unsustainable side. And that's when the kind of the budgeting finance conversations become quite tricky. And my advice, if there are churches out there where that is potentially looking like it might be, is going back to what we started about at the kind of the start of the pod, was talking about facts and the base layer of actually factually, how long do we have to be able to navigate and pursue avenues, faithfully pray, and see until we know we need to make more decisions, if that makes sense. So I think they're my two top tips of depending on how you navigate deficit budgets, depending on where you financially are as an organization, if that makes sense. So, I don't know if you have any comeback on that, but they're my
it's helpful, because I guess we've not had to set deficit budgets before, so my experience is very low on this, you know, if I'm honest. I do interact with a lot of churches who are doing that, and like you say, the deficit has been, we want to support staff and give them, you know, an increase in wage to help them through this time. And I love that. And I say, applaud that kind of faith, applaud that kind of decision, you know, to care for people. And I love that. I think we do want it to get to a point where it balances. And I think that's where an exercise of the forecasting of what you're talking about that sits alongside your budgeting is so useful. You know, what cutbacks can we make in the budget that can allow us over a period of time to build to a point where that deficit is finished in year 2, you know. And so you know, there's some churches out there who aren't budgeting at all, and so we want to start a conversation on that, and we can come back to that later. But those who are regularly budgeting and are in a deficit budget, take the time to look at it over the 2-3 year period and look at some of the cutbacks that you might be able to make, and that allow you then, at this point, I can see the information is pointing that actually we're going to be okay. And I think using our reserves policy and using some of those funds, it's legitimate to use it at this point. You know, this is a crisis that people are facing, and so we can often think, when is that rainy day? Well, you know, sometimes we need permission to say, actually, it's okay to dip into these funds now. and I'd be encouraging trustees, PCCs, and leadership teams. Let's talk about this. What do we need realistically in the reserve fund, and what can we move across to general funds that's going to help us in the next 2 years? And we can forecast it, say it is going to be 2 years, but also, let's pray, let's informing the church about a deficit can feel like quite a negative thing.
Yes.
But actually, it might cause people to say, we need to step into that gap. We need to help. What could we do that actually might look like ministry being different in terms of its cost? Maybe there's more people that we can throw at something that's going to reduce the expenditure. Where can people give? We were given an out of the blue donation this week, as we were talking about, right? What does it mean to pass the gospel on to the next generation? People hear that priority and go, I want to get behind that. I'm wondering what the budget is for that priority, and having conversation around that stirs people to say, yeah, I'd love to give more to that, and commit to give more to that over the next couple of years. So all of these things are helpful things, I think, to be chatting about and getting people involved in, and being honest about it, and doing that. So let's talk about forecasting then. Give me some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, forecasting is really interesting. I give a very quick distinction between budget.
Yeah, let's do that,
because they are different, but they can often be used interchangeably. Now, when I talk about a budget, we normally talk about it in its kind of formality of that. This is actually either what the finances we are aiming for or expecting, or we're going to compare this year. We're going to this period of time. We're going to compare this to, and a budget is often important to kind of keep semi-static, because it means you've got something that isn't moving that you can compare it to. And that comparison is a really, if you just very briefly talk about financial controls, having something to be able to compare your finances to, i.e. a budget, is really important. And if you kept on moving that budget, the comparisons is much harder. So some organizations might do a rebudget at month 6 or various other things, but keeping it static is generally what we class as a budget, something you're aiming towards or you're comparing against. Now, a forecast is the difference is that is very much future focused. Obviously a budget is, but really you're looking at that budget now, like how are we doing against budget now? Whereas a forecast is looking forward and saying, right, we're painting a picture into the future of what our financial story might look like, maybe under differing scenarios. This is the best case forecast. This is the most realistic, and this is the worst case. And the really great thing about forecasting is it is possibly the best financial tool that an organization can have to help aid decision making. Budgets are really good because you know where you think you're going to be by the year end, and you can compare it at the time. Whereas a forecast, essentially, you're opening up the window to say, right, if we're in this financial picture here, number A, we can do X, Y, and Z, and we can do it then. Or we're in scenario, it's looking tricky, we can't do that. And it means that all your decision making comes forward instead of being responsive, if that makes sense. So one of the things I spend a lot of time doing with my some of my kind of largerish frontline charities is doing this exercise of a 3 to 4 year forecast, which means that it takes the pressure of firefighting. And don't get me wrong, there's always firefighting, isn't there? Because the situation come along. But it helps if you're someone who works in finance with your church organization, and you're able to do a 2 or even 3 year forecast, that can help the conversation about vision, strategy, and resources very quickly. I'm a big, I don't know if you can tell, the Yorkshireman here is getting passionate about forecasting.
I love forecasting. This is great.
And and if you're an Excel person, then you can do all sorts of jazzy stuff, but you don't have to be. Do you know? It can be fairly straightforward, and it can really serve your organization well
Yes.
by doing that. So
yeah,
so
and
that's a little bit.
that is great. The forecasting thing is great. I think what you're talking there is great. I love the fact that you are bringing decisions earlier. You're bringing information earlier. So you're saying this is what we could face, and so it prompts us to be able to pray. It prompts us to be able to have that conversation about ministry and what we want to do over the next few years and priorities. And you're right, it does mean that we can be a lot more agile in how we can respond to situations, and the firefighting should be less on the basis that the forecasting is there, that we can all see it.
Absolutely. And the great thing about forecasting is it's there for the challenging times to navigate. We're making sure we've got the resources and we're floating, but it's also great for visionary stuff where you think, right, if we had a 20% increase in income, 30%, or we had this come in, what could it look like? What could the staff structure look like? What could we do here? And it opens up an exciting conversation, which is very different to the classic church treasurer saying, no, we can't
do that.
No,
absolutely right.
There. But so it changes it very, very much. So I'm a big fan of forecasting. Big fan.
Yeah, forecasting is great. And I think with the forecasting, I think one of the other things that Nigel recommended on the podcast with each other was this idea of like regularly reporting management accounts. So he was talking about monthly doing that. And I think, there are some touch points. So what do I do as somebody in our church finance wise? I'm looking at stuff weekly. I think I'm looking at stuff monthly, and I'm looking at stuff in a kind of seasonal basis. And we know, looking at some of the patterns of our giving over the last few years, there are quarters where we just receive less, but there are other quarters where weirdly it's made up and we receive more. And I think people forget sometimes, and there are different timing issues and all those kind of things. But that kind of that reporting stuff is good. And I think having a tool that enables you, or some software or something that helps you to pull together data quickly and easily and accessible, I think is another vital thing to help us with our budgeting, to help us with our forecasting. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, the tools out there are vast. With cloud accounting, even if you're just doing things on Excel, but the options that are there now for churches, that just weren't there 4 or 5 years ago. It's there. So if you're a church who are wanting, who have maybe have been doing your finances the same way for a long time, and maybe been reliant on key individuals, the options that are out there that can help you do all that are so much more accessible than they used to be. And I think a quick top tip for me is one of the other things I love talking to organizations about is financial storytelling. Is that having good reporting is brilliant, and it helps all this conversation. But if you can put that into a short, this is our financial story, this is where we've come from, this is where we are, and this is where we're going, in a short space of time, into a short snippet, that is brilliant. If you can convert your numbers into a story, you can help equip people, whether it's trustees, key management, whoever it is, in a much more effective way. It's brilliant. So it's worth checking out if that's something you think would be helpful.
Absolutely right. And let me just encourage anyone who's involved in finances in their church. You are doing some brilliant work. It is gospel ministry. Without you doing what you do to finances, you are, ministry wouldn't happen, would it?
Absolutely.
So you are enabling, there's an aspect that you are enabling ministry to happen because you are involved in the finances. And there's a sense of you're protecting the gospel as well, because having transparency, having good accounts, having a church that's following all the legislation and legal requirements, it just protects the gospel wonderfully and against accusation. And it really is essential, isn't it, to ministry?
Yeah, and it's possibly another pod for another day if listeners still listen to my Yorkshire accent. But one of the things we've spent quite a lot of time doing in this last year is helping churches navigate some charity commission investigations around around these sorts of things, and it is sadly there isn't many weeks where there isn't a church that ends up in some sort of charity commission investigation, normally around finances and transparency.
Yeah.
So it's a huge area. So what you're doing is absolutely essential. So
it is.
Keep on keeping on, because it's essential.
So important. So please check out some of the other podcasts, with Nigel Ring, and we were chatting about that at the start. It's just some great wisdom, and for that, I know we've been talking about a lot more about the practical things, and those are great. And pick up that. There are people like Stewardship who are writing some great blogs, and I know Stephen there has written something recently in kind of the middle of January. So please check out his stuff as well. There's some good people talking about this who are really helpful things at this time.
Yeah,
mate. How much have you been paid for that product placement over your shoulder? That expense plus cap. I see it.
Plus mug. My expense plus mug. I highly like my expense plus mug. I don't drink tea or coffee, but I do hot juice. And the great thing about hot juice is when it goes cold, it's just cold juice.
You can still drink it later.
So yeah, the mug is there.
It's on the other side, yeah. So Sam Lewis, I don't know how much you paid him to stick it on our pod, but superb. A bit of promo for.
I'm good. I'm very good
Expense
friends.
Plus.
I'm very good friends with Expense Plus, and we're worth mentioning actually that we the two organisation and Expense Plus have just passionate about helping organisations. Churches and a lot of the organisation with the churches is just being able to equip them in doing this well. And one of the things we've just finished doing recently is some short quick fire videos that are kind of helpful finance content, which are more on the technical side of things, which are often quite hard to find. So if you have some questions about different aspects of your accounts, or I've done one on budgeting or various other bits and pieces. I've actually done one on VAT, because there's some churches out there where VAT comes into play. They're no longer than 3 minutes. Sadly, you've got to look at me in another checkered shirt, but
I was going to mention the shirt to our viewers, because it is extraordinary, this shirt, this yellow shirt, and I'm not sure, I'm not some kind of fashion guru, but a checkered shirt might not be your best outlook.
That's my problem. I've just got a lot of checkered shirts. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, I deliberately didn't put a checkered shirt on today, because I knew that the video would end up.
The banter would be there, but if anything, go check out these videos. Even if you just go and check out the shirt. This was horrendous.
Well, the funny thing is we've done two lots of these short videos. One I'm wearing a blue one, and one I'm wearing a yellow one. So anyway, shirts, checkered shirts. That seems to be my go-to.
The content's great, and we love and trust. Tim is great, and Sam Lewis, the guys at Expense Plus. And if you haven't got a finance package or a tool that you're using, let me highly recommend these guys. Not just the software and the cloud-based accounting that they do. These guys love the local church. They love the people who are doing finances. They see the huge work that it is. They make the connection between how it links into the gospel and how it's ministry. And so, please, they are. I would highly recommend them. And they've set up this blog, and they've got Tim involved in making videos. I've looked on there for restricted funds. If you want just a quick snapshot of what on earth is this? What does this mean? Then what a great base it is. So the link will be on the website. It'll be on the video for those who are watching on YouTube or wherever else. Mate, we should finish it there on your checkered shirt.
Shirt. Land it on that one. Yeah.
Absolutely. Mate, so grateful for you and the difference that you're making. And mate, it's just such an easy conversation with you. You're so good at podcasts.
Well, I don't know about that. I think I'm just good at whittering on and talking. I think it's my inner dyslexia that means I'd far rather chat to somebody than have to write an email. But yeah, no, it's a joy to be on, and it's fascinating hearing the guests you have. I was listening to one the other day, and just the breadth of topics you cover is just just in itself an immense reminder of what churches do, and the breadth of administration and operations it covers, it's huge, and you kind of think, wow. And so yeah, top work on what you do. It's brilliant.
I appreciate that. That's great. Well, if we can be a blessing to you and there's any topics that you'd like us to cover on the podcast, then please get in contact at questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. Again, the website's full of resources. There's topics that you can dive into, and hopefully signpost you somewhere else, give you a bit of info, or even just give you a bit of confidence, say, am I on the right track? And I think a lot of church administrators saying to me, it was so helpful to run it past yours. What was your template? I love the template. We used portions of it in our own, in creating our own. I'm just like, yeah, this is great. This is great. So happy days. So connect in with us, and please check out the other podcasts. And thank you for joining us today. It's been great.